right and out that way, the way that you came in as well. We gather under the canopy over at Waitrose. Can I ask everybody please to either switch off their mobile phones or switch them to silent? And members, can we be sure that as we are webcast, can we ensure that the cards are fully pressed in? Moving on to the agenda then. Item 1, members. The minutes of our meeting on the 2nd of December, they've been on the table for the last 30 minutes or more. Is it your wish that I sign them as a correct record? Thank you very much. Apologies for absence, Fiona, apart, of course, from the chairman.
I can give you those, Deputy Chair. So it's apologies from Councillor Val Henry.
Okay. Item 3 then, declaration of interest.
Okay, so prior to the meeting, we have received a declaration of interest for Councillor Mary Wozeski, who's declared a non-pecuniary interest in planning applications WA 2015-1985, which is item A1, and WA 2015-2193, item B2. She is the chairman of Cranley Parish Council Planning Committee and has commented on both of these applications as a parish councillor.
Thank you very much. Any other late declarations, members? Mrs. Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I need to as well declare an interest as a Cranley Parish Councillor, but it's not a pecuniary interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No more? Moving on then. Questions by members of the public?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. Any relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since the last meeting? Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chairman. There are none this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move on then to applications for planning permission. We already had a useful site visit, a little boggy perhaps on Monday morning, but still very, very useful. Any other site inspections that might arrive from this meeting will take place on Monday the 8th of February. And then we're moving on then to item A1, WA 2015/1985, land to the rear of Garthwaite, 135 Horsham Road, Cranley. Jo.
Thank you, Chairman. This application relates to the provision of 2 new detached dwellings on land to the rear of an existing bungalow, number 135 Horsham Road. The site lies within the developed area of Cranley, where the principle of development may be considered acceptable, subject to its impact on visual and residential amenities. The site is surrounded by established built form. The proposed development will be served by a new access drive taken from the Horsham Road between numbers 133 and 135 Horsham Road. The access drive comes up through here. Concern has been expressed that the proposed access would not be appropriate for emergency vehicles. However, the Highway Authority have confirmed that the proposed width of the access would allow access for fire appliances and other emergency vehicles. The proposed dwellings, which are 4-bed units, would each have a footprint of 121.3 square metres, which includes an integral single garage, and would have an overall floor area of 207.8 square metres. As set out in the officer's report, the proposals would have a maximum ridge height of 9 metres. If I can just show you the elevations, they are the 2 properties are identical but handed. So you'll see plot 1 and then plot 2. And the higher part of the properties, the higher part of the ridge, is in the centre of the site with the boundaries to the sides. There's the proposed floor plans. And you'll see that there's a subservient section on the side with 2 dormers. The proposals would require the removal of an existing belt of conifer trees located within the existing garden area, which currently provides screening between the existing property and properties to the rear in Cromwell Place. Members will recall from the site visit that the site is surrounded by existing properties, most of which are 2-storey, although the properties to the south-east are Pendray and Helmsey are single-storey bungalows. Obviously, most members went to site, but just for clarity, here's some photographs. This is the existing properties shown from the access from the existing driveway onto Horsham Road. This is looking down Horsham Road. The new access is just sort of in this sort of location. This is the oak tree that's mentioned in the report, which is on the neighbour's side. This is the existing property looking back from the rear of the site and looking from the rear of the existing bungalow towards the site. So this is the tree belts that you'll recall we walked behind, but essentially these are all the trees that will be removed. This is from standing on the existing bund at the back of the site, looking towards properties to the rear in Cromwell Close, and then looking along the rear boundary. Looking towards Pendray and Helmsey, so these are the two bungalows. You can just see the ridge line there, and then the other one is along here. And this is actually at the end of the site visit. Most members had left, but we were able to take a photograph from the property Helmsey looking towards the site itself. So this is the hedge between Helmsey. We're in the garden of Helmsey, looking towards the site. The proposed development would provide 2 new market dwellings, which in some way would contribute to the housing needs of the borough. And this is a material consideration to be weighed against other considerations for this application, and in particular, the visual amenities of the area and the impact on residential amenities of existing occupiers. In your officer's view, the proposed development would make good and efficient use of a parcel of land within an existing residential area, and that on balance, the proposal would not cause material harm to the visual amenities of the area or the residential amenities of existing neighbours. This is nevertheless a matter of judgment. Turning to the update sheet, members will see that the Surrey Wildlife Trust have now responded. They raised no objections in principle to the proposal, and an amendment to condition 6 is recommended to reflect their comments. Furthermore, clarification regarding the emergency vehicle access has been received from the Highway Authority. One additional letter of objection has been received raising drainage and flooding issues, referring to the fact that existing gardens are underwater. In addition, a further letter has been received out of time and since the publication of the update sheet, which is predominantly concerned with flooding issues, making reference to the fact that a small gully used to run through the site and referencing recent flooding events which is understood to have been related to an overcharged system. Reference is made to similar flooding concerns in relation to the recent development at Willow Close. In response to these concerns regarding a recent flood, this is understood to have been a result of an overcharged system, the maintenance and capacity of which is a matter for Thames Water to resolve. These issues have already been addressed in the report, where it is outlined that the site lies outside of any designated flood zone and no objection has been received from Thames Water. Therefore, in the absence of technical objection, it would be inappropriate to resist the proposed development on flooding grounds. Nonetheless, officers note that Thames Water has commented that it's the responsibility of the developer to make proper provision for a drainage to the ground and water courses or a suitable sewer. This is a matter which is dealt with at building control regulation stage. Notwithstanding the fact, if members feel that this is an issue of particular concern, an additional condition requiring submission of a surface water drainage strategy could be appended to any permission granted. It's therefore recommended that the application is granted, subject to conditions 1 to 5 and 7 to 13, and informatives 1 to 7, as set out in the report, an amended condition 6, and an additional informative 8, as set out on the update sheet. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Jo. This application, of course, is subject to public speaking, and we do have 2 public speakers. First, Mr. Warburton. I believe that the procedure has been explained to you. You do have 4 minutes when you are ready. Good evening. Thank you very much, Mr. Warburton. Our next speaker is from Cranley Parish Council, Councillor Mrs. Burbridge. As before.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Councillor Burbridge. Members. Mrs. Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to be brief because I can't add anything that hasn't already been said by the resident and Councillor Burbridge. I would like to add that I have some major concerns about overlooking and the effect that it will have on the 2 single-storey properties to the side of the dwellings and the rear at Cromwell Place. I just think it's so overbearing, so intrusive, so out of place. We can't compare this application to many applications that have gone along the Horsham Road where they've had infill, over backland development, whatever you want to call it. It is completely different. The further you go along the Horsham Road, the more spread out it becomes. It is not in keeping. I actually thought what Councillor Burbridge said at the end there was a very... It's a shame that application didn't come in the format that was suggested there. 2 houses on the front would have been far more perhaps desirable than that's what's being proposed here. It is a complete overdevelopment of the site. I would like to say to officers, I think you've done a very good report. It's very, very comprehensive. And I would like to just say thank you to my fellow councillors for attending and supporting the site visit. I think it was very, very beneficial because it really gave you a feel for the site and the impact that it's going to have on those residents. For me, with respect to the officer's recommendation, having viewed the site and having looked at the impact, I cannot support this because I think it would be a travesty to the lifestyles of the neighbouring residents. And I also think there's another solution on the table here. It's not for this committee to decide that at this moment in time, but at this moment in time, and I look forward to what my fellow colleagues say, but I'm sorry, I cannot support the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Forashevsky. Mrs. Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank Mr. Warburton and Councillor Burbridge for their presentation to us this evening, and I have to be honest and say there is probably very little I can add to that, and I support most of what they have said. I do think that residents are entitled to enjoy the privacy and amenity value of the band of trees that are to be felled to make way for the proposed development. The trees have been there for a long time. They may not be the best specimens in the world, but they are a part of Cranley and they have been there for a long time. I'm concerned about the extent of the development in this area that changes, if this development was to go ahead, it would change the very nature of the area. And without wishing to suggest for 1 minute that this would set a precedent, nevertheless, it does appear to me to be a considerable departure from policy and introduces into the area backland development that I am aware that has caused great concern at the Parish Council in the past. Moving to the proposed properties, they're very large, and by virtue of their bulk and mass would seriously impinge on the visual amenities of the area. I think that they would cause material harm to the living conditions and the amenity value of the residents living in properties behind and in close proximity to the site. And my view at this stage of the debate is that I'm sorry, I cannot support the officer's decision, and I do at this stage object very strongly to this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ellis. Mr. Stennett.
Thank you, Chairman. I absolutely agree with what my colleagues have said. And I would like to add that having owned and run my own company in Cranley for some 47 years and worked on most of the major drainage and sewerage schemes, they are at capacity, and even as we were looking, you could see the water in the gardens with nowhere to go. In the houses, I think to the east of that, were all flooded up Avenue Road, plus we've got nightingales where we've had vehicles camped out all night watching the flood water come down, so to alert the residents if it floods down there. And I think this is also overdevelopment, and it's a horrible impact on the local houses as well. So I'm afraid the officers have done a good report, but I can't support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stennett. Mr. Goodrich. Mr.
Chairman, I thought the site was very helpful, and I'm glad I brought my Wellington boots. Has been mentioned by Councillor Burbridge the solution to developing this site, but we have to deal with the planning application that we have before us, which unfortunately it isn't 2 houses replacing the bungalow. I have to say, and we have an excellent report, and the matters where we are being given expert advice, we really have to accept, because it will be difficult on appeal to argue against anything which, where we have professional advice. However, there are some aspects of this application where a matter of judgment is called upon. And I have to say that when it comes to a matter of judgment, I do think the impact on the residential amenity of the neighbours in Cromwell Place, in view of the size of the houses that are being proposed, I mean, if they were going to be bungalows or something of that nature, it would have been less of an impact. But these are fairly large for the site that's available. 2 large houses are on a very limited site. Now, I appreciate that the land immediately to the adjacent to the fence, as part of the conditions, would be lowered down to the average level of the property. So that was the only dry bit, I think, in the garden that we stood on. And I would imagine, and of course we didn't have the benefit of going into the bungalows and having a look from their side, and although the bungalows will not have material windows overlooking them, the massing from the bungalows, I suspect, would not be a pleasant sight. So my view at the moment is that as a matter of judgment, the impact on the residential amenity of the neighbours is a matter that would cause me sufficient concern to refuse it on that ground and that ground only.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goodrich. Mr. Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me join colleagues in thanking Mrs. Dawes for yet another typically thorough report. I've got a couple of points, really, where I'd be interested for officer comment on the hierarchy of supporting documentation, and this relates to where the Cranley Design Statement actually fits in. The section on impact on visual amenity does consider the 2008 Cranley Design Statement, but the Design Statement asks that new developments should harmonise with the rural character of the locality and be of suitable construction. I'm not convinced that the proposed development actually harmonises with the rural character. There's plots near the edge of the village, and the plots are reasonably spaced to reflect this. So the addition of 2 large new detached houses rather tends to urbanise the area. Secondly, in the section on the report on third-party representations, the question of flooding implications is handled by the lack of objection from Thames Water and the fact that the land lies outside any designated flood zones. But set against this is the statement in the Cranley Design Statement that says any new or refurbished development should take into account the loss of ground available for the absorption of rainwater, which could lead to flooding. So this application will significantly reduce the proportion of land available for the absorption of water in an area which is clearly prone to surface water retention, as we saw on Monday. So presumably the determination is a question of hierarchy of the different requirements, and it would be interesting to know where the design statement sits in this hierarchy, because if the design statement should be considered over and above the other items, then I think there's evidence, or there are requirements in it that the report hasn't necessarily satisfied. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Seaborn. Mrs. Stennett.
Thank you, Chairman. Having being the last of the Cranley councillors to comment, I've taken notes on what my colleagues have said. And quite honestly, it seems to me, although Mrs. Dawes has done an excellent report, we all had a good look in the garden of Garthwaite, and I was one of the councillors who did manage to look from the garden of the bungalows, one of the bungalows. I can only say that I thought the whole thing was considerably unneighbourly. The houses are too large, the plot is too small, there is an awful loss of privacy for those 4 properties at the rear, and the impact of these large houses on a small site, I think, is too much for me to it's too much for me to recommend that we approve it. So, I can only say thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Dennett. Mr. Deans.
Thank you, and I think a lot of the points have been made tonight. I think the site visit was worth its weight in gold. It was wet and squidgy, but being able to stand in that area where the 2 houses are, I think was invaluable for me personally. And I think the saying, squeezing a pint into a half-pint glass, summed it up for me. It's far too small for what the 2 houses need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Denis. Mr. Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. I didn't have the opportunity of going to the site visit, so I haven't had all of the detailed visual knowledge that people have put forward today. But looking at the presentation of the houses, the size of the houses, and hearing all of the comments from both the objecting occupants of the adjacent premises and properties and the parish councillor, I have to agree. To me, it is a typical overdevelopment of a site. It's trying to make it's not fitting in with the design statement, it's making its own statement. It's trying to dominate the whole character of this particular area, which obviously has a large number of single-storey dwellings, and will just look totally out of keeping and overusing that site. And it's typical of what architects seem to be doing nowadays. They want to overdevelop every site that they get the opportunity to put a proposal in for, and then subsequently, at some stage later, change their minds and come in with smaller ones. I'm not recommending they do that, but I am very sympathetic to all the things that have been said about it by my colleagues.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm obviously not going to repeat what's been said before, but I can't help but feel that the loss of amenity for the residents round about is considerable. And in my mind, I feel that that must be a determining factor in the way that I vote on this, and I would not support the application.
Thank you very much. No other speakers? Perhaps I could throw in a few words myself. I have to say I really did appreciate the invitation from Mr. Warburton to view from, I believe, his back garden the possible development. And I think the prospect of having had an outlook in your back garden and from your house, just to overlook trees and not see very, very much more, to have that obliterated by this application, I find very, very distressing. Much of what both Mr. Warburton and Councillor Burbridge have said, and indeed what other members have said, I think I fully support. But I look on page 16 of the officer's report, and it says, Cranley Design Statement 2008 states that sites for new development should have regard to the traditional character of the Cranley area. This, to my mind, were it approved, would seriously destroy the character of this area, and therefore I cannot support the officer's recommendation. But let's move then to the recommendation, if I can find the right piece of paper. Yeah. On page 3. Sorry.
If I could just come back on one point. Councillor Seaborn did ask for a response on the hierarchy, he described it, of the policies that have been referred to, and if it's helpful just to confirm, the Cranley Design Statement has been adopted by the Council as a material planning consideration, provides detailed guidance to you in assessing planning applications such as this, effectively sits under the development plan, which is the local plan, which provides the broad context for assessing planning applications. So both are relevant. The development plan takes precedence, but in this instance, the design guidance is a very useful tool to you and highly material to your assessment. So I hope that helps. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Let's move back then to... Are you happy with that response, Mr. Seaborn? Fine. You'll find a revised recommendation on page 3, and that is that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 5 and 7 to 13 and informatives 1 to 7 as set out in the report and subject to amending condition 6 and additional informative as set out in the update sheet. Can I see members in favour of that revised recommendation, please?
That's none, Chairman.
Those against, please. Oh.
11, that's unanimous.
Thank you very much. Would anybody like to propose an alternative? Mrs. Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, please, if I may, I would like to propose an alternative recommendation that the application considers is not granted and we object to it. So it's a refusal.
Would you have some...
On the grounds of the Cranley design statement being looked at in further and full detail, and by virtue of bulk and mass over development of the site and how to keep them with the existing properties and not good use of the area. Access, I think, is also an issue we need to be looking at. Flooding is also another issue we needed to be looking at. And loss of privacy and the amenity to neighbouring properties. And I'm sure we could work with officers to word that more articulately than I have just put it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Wojciechowski. Mr. Goodrich.
Chairman, we're liable to be watering down the effectiveness of refusing it if we put everything in, including the kitchen sink, including access, which the Highway Authority are happy with. I would suggest that we confine ourselves to the impact on the residential amenity of neighbours, and contrary to the Cranley design statement, and if we just restrict it to that, I'd have thought, which are matters of judgment, I would suggest that it is stronger than throwing everything we can possibly think of at it. Is my view.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goodrich. I fully support that. Mr. Bain.
Say, Chairman, I support that with just a possible addition or specific reference to the failure of the visual amenity, the unacceptable visual amenity impact, because there's the other judgment issue.
Thank you very much. Sorry, we don't have a seconder yet for Mrs. Ellis. Do you wish to speak? You want to word?
Yes, Chairman, I think we have some wording we could put around members' thoughts on that if you'd like us to read it out. Thank you.
I think essentially members are talking about two separate reasons for refusal, one based on visual amenity and one based on residential amenity. In terms of the visual amenity, the proposed development by virtue of the backland position of the dwellings would fail to take account of the prevailing pattern of development in the locality. Proposal would result in a cramped form of development which would be harmful to the character and appearance of the surrounding area. Proposal therefore conflicts with policies D1 and D4 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan and paragraphs 17 and 64 of the MPPF and the Cranley Design Statement 2008. That's in relation to visual amenity. Residential amenity, the proposed development by reason of its proximity to neighbouring boundaries, proposed fenestration, height, scale, bulk and mass of the proposed development would result in a degree of overlooking and loss of privacy, which would be materially harmful to the amenities of neighbouring occupiers. The proposal will fail to comply with the guidance of the Council's supplementary planning document for residential extensions, policies D1 and D4 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan and paragraph 17 of the MPPF. Right. Okay.
Members, would you be more comfortable with that? Yes. Sounds good. So then, did we have a... Oh, we'd had... Mrs. Ellis was a seconder. So the revised recommendation advocates refusal on the grounds that Joe Dawes has just read out. Can I see members in favour of that recommendation, please?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Gary. Permission then is not granted, it is refused. I now see back there that our chairman has managed to recover her car keys, so I will release the chair. Thank you.
Right. Good evening, members. Please accept my apologies for being late and my thanks to my Vice Chairman for taking up the mantle. Thank you very much. So now we move on to item B1 WA 2015-1997 Fastbridge Farm Cottage, Guildford Road, Cranley, GU6 8HE. Tim, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, the site comprises a detached bungalow located here, outlined in red, which was constructed in the 1960s. Its original construction was as a farm workers' dwelling linked to the wider farm to the north. Condition 2 of that permission specifically restricted the occupation of that dwelling. The proposal seeks removal of this condition. Although the property has not been marketed to the wider agricultural community, a certificate of lawfulness has been established for the dwelling's continued occupation in breach of this condition. Members should note that the certificate did not remove this condition. As such, the proposal is in conflict with policy RD12 of the local plan. However, with the certificate of lawfulness in place, officers consider that condition 2 no longer serves a useful planning purpose, and as such, officers recommend permission be granted for its removal. So, members, the determining issues for this application really are, in terms of matters of judgment, really the weight to be afforded to the certificate of lawfulness. It should be noted that the reason the application has come to committee because of the technical conflict with policy RD12. And on the update sheet, members should note that we've got no objection from the parish council that has come through. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tim. Members, do we have any? Councillor Danis.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief, and I've noticed all of our members of the public have now gone, so whether they knew I was going to speak first or not. So I'll be very brief. There is already a certificate of lawfulness that's been issued. It's been over 10 years since it's been occupied by somebody who's been part of agriculture or forestry. The proposal has no material impact on neighbouring residential properties, so I support the application. I think it's a sensible application. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Nobody else? Oh, Councillor Stennett.
Yeah, I think that's very wise words, and I would support that too. Thank you.
Okay, so we're ready now to move on to the recommendation. And that is that permission be granted subject to condition 1 and informative one as set out on pages 37 and 38 of the report. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant, please?
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, unanimous.
So none against and none abstaining. Thank you, members. So the recommendation to grant is agreed. Thank you. And now we move on to item B2, WA 2015-2193. Land at Sheridan, Cranley. Joe, yes it is Joe. Would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
This is an application to erect a pair of semi-detached affordable dwellings on an existing car parking forecourt within the Sheridan housing estate. The application has been submitted by the Council's Housing Department, hence why it's come to committee. This is the site. It's a part of an area of car parking, hard stand car parking, which covers all of this area here. The site lies within the developed area of Cranley, where the principle of development may be considered acceptable, subject to the impact on visual and residential amenities. As I say, the site is part of a wider concrete surface car park, which is surrounded and operated by the council. The parking area is, owned and operated by the council. The car parking area is surrounded by existing two-storey properties. The proposed development would create two-bed units with associated car parking and private garden areas, which would also include the provision of a cycle storage shed. So this is the row of existing two-storey houses. This is a pair of semis with the sheds to the rear, parking to the front, and an enclosed garden. The provision of two affordable units would in some small way contribute to the housing needs of the borough, and this is a material consideration to be weighed against the other considerations. Given the proximity of the proposal to the rear garden area of properties facing Ewhurst Road, and that's these properties, I've lost my mouse here, these properties down here, the property incorporates a hipped roof rather than a gable to minimise the impact on the neighbouring windows on the rear elevations of those properties. Although it's noted that the neighbouring properties have garden sheds and in some cases caravans in their rear gardens. So this is a proposal, the elevation of the front and then the rear. This is the side elevation which would be facing those properties on the Ewhurst Road. That's the floor plan showing 2 bedrooms with a bathroom upstairs. Essentially, this is the street scene. It's not particularly clear on my screen, but you can see that's the existing terrace and then a new property here. The application will seek to the applicants have sought to justify the proposal, having regard to the resultant loss of 15 car parking spaces. They've submitted a parking stress survey, which concludes that the local vicinity has a particularly low level of parking stress. Essentially, the parking area is underused most of the time. Officers are of the view that the proposal would not result in a severe impact on highway safety or the ability to park within the locality. Turning to some photographs, this is taken from the approach from the Sheridan Estates. I'm coming down into the estate. This is the area of car parking at the rear here, and the proposal is essentially coming along in this area here. These are the properties that are backing onto or fronting onto the Ewhurst Road, backing onto the site. So again, the site is in here. You'll see it's just a big area of car parking. That again shows a relationship with the neighbouring properties here. There is a footpath that will be retained along the back of these properties between the development and the existing built form. That's looking from the other side, so essentially this is the rear elevation of that existing property that we saw. That's looking towards the houses that are onto the Ewhurst Road, and that's looking back at the side elevation of the existing property, and essentially the development will be bringing that built form forward, but with a hip rather than a gable end. Turning to the update sheet, members will see that Surrey Wildlife Trust have now commented on the application. Whilst noting that the Wildlife Trust recommended enhancements to the biodiversity of the site, it's considered unreasonable in this instance to impose a condition given the status of the existing site as a car park. Nonetheless, additional highway conditions are recommended as set out by the Highway Authority together with additional informatives. It's therefore recommended that the permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 8 and informatives 1 to 5 as set out in the report, and additional conditions 9 and 10 and additional informatives 6 to 8 as set out on the update sheet. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Joe. Over to you, members. Councillor Foraszewski.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to say I fully support this. I think it's a good use of the land and it's a much needed type of housing and it sits perfectly within that particular area. And in terms of loss of the car parking, there really isn't, because the surrounding area does soak up and has a tremendous amount of availability for additional parking and is an underused area for parking. So I fully support the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Foraszewski has said exactly what I was going to say, and I couldn't have said it better. I fully support this application. It's desperately needed accommodation, and the car parking facility is grossly underused. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. It's always of great concern to me when we remove parking areas, especially in areas where there is congestion. I note here that neither the parish council nor any other residents has raised objections that the stress parking test, I don't know what that is, but has been carried out, and therefore I would fully support the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Byam.
I listened with interest to the report and talked about a caravan in the back gardens of one of the properties. Then we look at the last but one photograph, I think, where it shows it. How did it gain access? Obviously across this car park. Has it got any way out? Doesn't look like it without demolishing the footpath. Is that one of our own dwellings, or is it privately owned? And have we advised the owner of the caravan that he's got to move it pretty quick?
10 out of 10 there for observation. Very good. Officers, do we know?
In a word, no. I mean, there is a barrier along here, so I'm not quite sure how they got it in, and I don't know whether. I don't think there's any access at the. We could advise housing. I think most of these houses are within. I mean, some of them are privately owned, obviously, but some of them are owned by the council. So we could perhaps advise the housing department to.
I suspect, Chairman, that if there is a problem there, there'll be an opportunity for the caravan to be removed before the development is built out. So it's a very good question. It's clearly not overriding in the assessment of this application, but I suspect the residents of that property may be grateful for the fact that you raised it on a practical point, and we can at least raise it with the housing team as a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mr. Stennett.
Thank you, Chairman. Just let everyone know, my mother lives there actually, and I'll have a word with her in the morning and she'll move it, so don't be worrying about it. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs. Stennett.
All totally untrue. His poor mother passed away some years ago. I did notice with interest that in December 2 years ago, our housing needs were 250 houses per year. Having now risen to 519 houses, perhaps we could find a bit more space in car parks for more of these two-bedroom properties, which are so desperately needed in the Cranley area. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Are there any more comments? So, therefore, we will move on to the recommendation, and that is that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 8 and informatives 1 to 5 as set out on page 52 to 56 of the report, and additional conditions 9 and 10 and additional informatives 6 to 8 as set out on the update sheet, and also providing the caravan can get out, I suppose. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant?
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, unanimous.
Thank you. None against, none abstaining then. So thank you, members. The recommendation to grant is agreed. And there are no items to consider in exempt, and so that concludes the meeting this evening. Thank you.